On this Saturday night, reflection on World Holocaust Remembrance Day. At a time of rising anti-Semitism, a Nazi death camp survivor's message of hope.
I can imagine a world where people are kind to one another.
As Israel's war rages on, the dire warning about Gaza's largest remaining medical facility nearing collapse. Explicit AI images.
We are alarmed by the reports of the circulation of images.
The calls for greater safeguards after obscene deepfakes of Taylor Swift went viral. And finally paid.
You can win if you're in the right.
The couple who took Air Canada to court over a flight delay and won.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Today, the world paused, reflecting and remembering one of the darkest times in human history, paying tribute to 6 million Jewish people and others persecuted and murdered by the Nazis during the Second World War. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which also coincides with the 79th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, where more than 1 million Jewish people were killed. Holocaust survivors and their relatives held prayers and placed candles during a ceremony at the site in southern Poland earlier today. Global leaders are urging the rejection of anti-Semitism and hate in a world that seems to be growing more divided. A synagogue in downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick, was vandalized overnight. Several windows were shattered, with glass littering the ground. Police say they're working to determine whether the synagogue was targeted. Caryn Lieberman takes a closer look at the state of anti-Semitism in Canada on this Holocaust Remembrance Day and how events in the Middle East continue to fuel hate crimes against the Jewish community.
And that's the only thing I have of my mom.
Hetty Bohm has little left to show from the past, but the memories remain vivid.
I was in hell in Auschwitz, which was truly hell.
As a Holocaust survivor, watching events in the Middle East brings her back decades.
What we see now is devastating. A worldwide hatred of Jews.
Immediately following the October 7th attack on Israel, police in Canada stepped up security in Jewish neighborhoods and around places of worship, noting an uptick in reported hate crimes. Between October 7th and December 17th, Toronto's police chief says there were 98 hate crimes reported, compared to 48 during the same period in 2022. Of these incidents, more than half were anti-Semitic.
I have had people calling me, say they're the only Jewish family in their school, their child is being spit on. They have students etching swastikas into their child's locker.
A Montreal Jewish school was hit twice by gunfire in November in less than a week.
I looked at it not just literally as someone shooting bullets through the door of the school, but figuratively, someone just shooting a bullet into this warm, beautiful community and just like shaking us up for absolutely no reason other than hatred and bias.
University campuses across North America have become a hotbed for tension, with student clashes, some violent, like this one at Concordia.
What is happening in synagogues, in schools, at businesses, people's homes, this is not Canada. The Quran tells me that unless I respect the people of the book, which includes Jews and Christians and people of other faith, I can't expect for them to respect me.
For survivors like Bohm, who have dedicated their lives to raising awareness about the consequences of hate, a recent global rise of anti-Semitism has her wondering.
We thought we're doing something, but look what's happening. Whatever we did wasn't enough or wasn't the right thing.
Jews had to start identifying themselves with these yellow badges.
Last year, the Toronto Holocaust Museum opened its doors to the public, unveiling a space dedicated to remembrance and education.
They're coming here to really understand the full scope and to hear survivor testimony and to learn the rise of anti-Semitism and the impact that the Holocaust had on the Jewish community.
Bohm hopes people take every opportunity to hear the stories of the past to prevent history from repeating itself.
I can imagine a world where people are kind to one another, regardless of color and religion and nationality.
Caryn Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is warning of a rise of the far right in his country as it marks International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Scholz says concerns are growing as right-wing groups gain significant political support among Germans, including one party that sparked protest over revelations its members took part in a secret meeting with extremist groups. Mike Armstrong explains.
It is a pushback against a party that is growing. More than 100,000 people protested in the streets of Dusseldorf Saturday with a warning. The Alternative for Germany party, they say, is getting stronger. This woman says they're sending a signal. The AfD won't get into power, but there are too many people against them. There have been protests against the AfD for weeks. This was Thursday night in Rostock, a city that knew not only the Holocaust, but more recently in the 90s, anti-immigrant riots. Neo-Nazis burned the homes of migrants to chants of Sieg Heil. We need to finally stand up and fight against our country moving more and more to the right, she says.
Pfui Teufel!
The AfD is the fifth largest party in the German parliament. It's polling at about 20% nationally. The far-right group campaigns on issues like the cost of living and environmental policies, but it is also deeply nationalist and anti-immigration. In fact, more so each year.
In einem Landhotel in der Nähe.
Now, the recent wave of protests was sparked by a report members of the party took part in a secret meeting of far-right extremist groups that included neo-Nazis. The policy pushed in the meeting was called re-migration, the expulsion of migrants who've gone to Germany, including naturalized citizens. That would contravene refugee conventions and the German constitution. Protesters have pointed out parallels with Nazi Germany. In fact, the secret meeting took place just kilometers from where the Nazi Party planned its so-called final solution of the Jewish question.
I love Germany, and I moved to Germany in the 90s, and what's happening right now with the AfD is not the Germany I came to and came for, and I'm disgusted.
Now, many are pointing to an urgency for their message. There are local and regional elections in the eastern part of the country slated for September. Polls in that region put the AfD at about 30% and in the lead. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The fighting in Gaza is showing no end in sight. After 3 months of bloodshed, the enclave's health system is on the brink of collapse. Aid agency Doctors Without Borders says Gaza's largest remaining medical facility, Nasser Hospital, is now unable to provide critical medical care, and that there are few places for those who need care in Han Yunis to go. Israeli forces have ordered everyone in certain neighborhoods to get out, including from the hospital. The Hamas-run health ministry says 174 Palestinians have been killed in the past 24 hours, and hundreds more have been wounded as Israel intensifies its assault 1 day after the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to prevent genocide in Gaza. Today, the UK, Italy, and Finland joined several other nations, including the US and Canada, in pausing funding for the UN's Relief and Works Agency, one of the largest providers of aid in Gaza. 12 agency members were fired over allegations they supported and were involved in the October 7th Hamas attacks. In the Red Sea, Yemen's Houthi rebels have delivered another strike, this time hitting a fuel tanker with links to the UK. They also fired a missile at a U.S. warship patrolling the Gulf of Aden, saying it is a response to American-British aggression. As the U.S. campaign trail heats up, there are fears our southern neighbor is becoming less attractive to Canadians taking on foreign posts. Personal safety and health care are high on the list of concerns. The union representing Canada's foreign service officers is urging Ottawa to take those issues more seriously, part of a broader push to revitalize Canada's diplomatic corps worldwide. David Akin reports.
The reality and frequency of gun violence in the United States is America's major public safety problem, but it's also spooking some Canadian diplomats there.
I mean, the security situation in some of these, these places has deteriorated. Like, you're hearing more demonstrations, shootings, underfunding of police departments, and all kinds of problems. And we're starting to see it really affecting our members.
On top of that, getting adequate health care coverage has made America a less attractive spot for diplomatic postings.
It adds a layer of stress and uncertainty and risk, frankly, that makes it difficult for people to, that makes it harder for people to look at these postings.
The healthcare problem is one affecting the civil service in Canada and around the world after the government of Canada switched insurance providers for its employees. It's a switch the new provider itself concedes overwhelmed its capacity to deal with claims.
That's something that's really got to be straightened out before it gets very serious and someone is forced to pay a fortune for medical care in the United States.
Senator Peter Beam spent a career with Global Affairs Canada, and now as the chair of the Senate's Foreign Affairs Committee, he led a year-long study to find ways to revitalize the Foreign Service. It's a service his committee argues is vital for Canada's future prosperity and security.
This is part of our government. This is part of what we do. This is who we represent. We represent an important, strong, diverse country, and we do that abroad. And that message has to get out there to Canadians so it doesn't get lost in the fog of politics.
Some argue diplomacy will be even more important to Canada in an era when the U.S. and other allies are questioning traditional alliances.
I would say, regardless of the outcome in the election in the United States, but especially if Trump gets elected, we need to massively ramp up diplomacy, ramp up our armed forces, and ramp up our development assistance, because Canada is in for a very, very rocky ride for the years to come.
The Trudeau government broadly agrees with calls to revitalize the diplomatic corps, but it is still figuring out just how to do that. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
The long-awaited national inquiry into foreign interference will finally kick off public hearings in Ottawa Monday. The same day, MPs will return to Parliament after their winter recess. Our Mercedes Stevenson spoke with two national security experts to preview the inquiry. Mercedes, how much ground will the inquiry cover?
Neithu, while the initial hearings won't get into any of the juicy stuff, as in what actually happened, it will still be an important discussion because it's going to deal with just how much information, some of which is highly classified, should be released to the public. Former CSIS director and national security advisor to the Prime Minister, Dick Fadden, is one of the experts scheduled to testify this week. Fadden leads towards more transparency, but this week on the West Block, he told me that he's concerned that the inquiry timeline is simply too short for Commissioner Marie-Josée Hogue to properly study the issue, especially now that there are more countries being looked at than just China.
I think she is operating under a time frame that makes it almost impossible, in my view, to deal with all of these issues substantively. So if I were the commissioner, and I never will be, I would say report at the end of this year, but then ask for another 6 to 8 months to complete things. We'll probably be in an election then, and nobody will be paying a great deal of attention.
It has been over a year since concerns about Chinese interference were publicly revealed. Experts say it's taken too long to set up the inquiry and that Canada could take meaningful action before the inquiry is over. They also point out that Canada is already behind allied countries when it comes to protecting our elections.
The United Kingdom, Australia, US, they have been working on this for the last 5-10 years. We're just beginning that work.
There will be a second round of public hearings in March. That's when the inquiry is expected to take a deeper dive into the potential interference by China, Russia, and India in the 2019 and the 2021 Canadian federal elections. Not scheduled, however, to be put under the microscope in the inquiry, Iran. This despite numerous reports of alleged interference by the Iranian regime with the Iranian-Canadian diaspora. And that's one country that our experts say needs to be added. We'll have more on the show. Neithu?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. Swift action needed. Coming up, the calls for stronger legislation after explicit deep fakes target the world's biggest pop star. Fake pornographic images of Taylor Swift spread across social media this week, sounding the alarm about the rise of advanced AI technology. Swift is the world's biggest pop star, so it shows how anyone can be targeted. And with the U.S. campaign in full swing and our own federal election on the horizon, Mike Drolet looks at the calls for stronger laws to stop damaging deepfakes.
It's me.
She's the biggest pop star in the world. Everyone, it seems, wants a piece of Taylor Swift.
Hey y'all, it's Taylor Swift here.
Here she is selling cookware. It certainly sounds like her, and explicit photos that appeared online this week look like her. But none of it is real. It's AI-generated deepfake, and it's caught the eye of top officials.
We are alarmed by the reports of the circulation of images that you just laid out, false images to be more exact, and it is alarming.
The quality of deepfake technology is advancing at an alarming rate. Comedian George Carlin died in 2008, yet here he is.
I'm sorry it took me so long to come out with new material, but I do have a pretty good excuse. I was dead.
While his estate is suing the media company that created it, finding who is responsible for the President Joe Biden robocall
What a bunch of malarkey.
won't be as easy, partly due to the anonymity of the internet, but also because there are only a handful of U.S. states that have laws related to AI in place. Canada will be able to regulate AI platforms with Bill C-27, but it's unlikely to be in place before next year, leaving the onus on the companies that create the programs to build safeguards.
That is a tale as old as time of capitalism, right? It is really an arms race right now between Microsoft, Google, Amazon, the big tech companies, to try to create the market share around this technology. And the result is that they're cutting corners on what I would call responsible development or ethical development.
But tech companies and governments alike will have a hard time ignoring Tay-Tay's rabid fan base, which reacted swiftly to purge social media of the offensive photos, which in turn prompted Microsoft's CEO to promise action.
I think that it behooves us to move fast on this.
It's a brave new world out there when it comes to technology. We just have to decide what we want that world to look like. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, the couple who successfully sued Air Canada for ignoring passenger rights. Federal air passenger protection regulations are meant to compensate travelers for flight disruptions, but some airlines often ignore those rules. So for passengers, the only option is to take those companies to court. Heidi Petracek spoke to one couple that took on Canada's biggest airline.
We had a lot of them.
When Terry and Vicky Lynn Black's Air Canada flight to New York was cancelled in 2022, the airline blamed crew constraints due to COVID-19 and later rejected their application for financial compensation under air passenger protection regulations.
It's not cool being just basically brushed aside.
The Canadian Transportation Agency offers passengers recourse, but with a current backlog of almost 65,000 complaints, the Blacks thought small claims court might be the shorter route.
I honestly thought it would be much faster.
A year and a half later, a Nova Scotia adjudicator ordered Air Canada pay the Blacks the amount owed under the regulations, plus interest and costs, almost $1,600.
You can win if you're in the right, but you have to decide whether the effort is worth it for you.
As of this month, there are more airlines operating in Canada that now fall under the regulations, including Air Transat, Sunwing, and Flair. That likely means more potential claims.
What needs to happen is far more aggressive enforcement and far clearer set of rules.
The Canadian Transportation Agency says it is working on that, using a new process to tackle its caseload, and says proposed changes to the regulations expected later this year should also help.
To deal with some of the gaps or the shortcomings of these relatively young regulations that we enacted in 2019.
Although the National Airlines Council of Canada warns what's on the table, including steeper fines, could ultimately hurt travelers.
First of all, it will add significant costs to the air travel system. Two, it will have an impact on regional connectivity.
The Blacks hope the decision in their case sets a helpful precedent for anyone planning to have their own day in court, the only way they found to get their compensation. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Windsor Junction, Nova Scotia.
Next, miniature marvel, a sneak peek at what's inside the world's largest dollhouse. A dollhouse may be something your children want or say they need, but did you know the largest, most famous one is in the UK? It was a gift for Queen Mary following the First World War and is on display at Windsor Castle. Crystal Gamansing shows us its many treasures.
They're miniature, but there's no mistaking the sovereign scepter, orb, and crown, complete with real jewels. Just 3 of the uniquely crafted and spectacular items furnishing this doll's house made for the consort of King George V.
Initially, it was intended to just be a gift to Queen Mary because she was very fond of anything that was miniature. She had a great fondness for that type of object. But gradually, as the project progressed, it became actually much more serious in purpose, and it turned into a showcase for British craftsmanship.
Imagine the steady hand needed to string this tiny concert piano or lay the 2,000 tiles that make up the kitchen floor. Surely there must have been a trick to getting actual gem inside these oh so tiny glass jars. Throughout this Edwardian residence built 100 years ago, there are numerous intricate creations that boggle the mind.
I hope you can just pick up that there's a little thread here that's been carefully fed through. So this little flap, if I take these scissors off, this little flap comes up and is hinged properly.
Over 1,500 artists, craftspeople, and manufacturers contributed to Queen Mary's doll's house. To mark its centenary, some of the miniatures are being displayed alongside their full-scale counterparts at Windsor Castle.
When it was first shown in 1924, 100 years ago, it was on display at the Empire exhibition, and of course there it was seen by a huge number of people.
Another royal house that continues to draw a crowd, but not to worry. This one is also guarded by a knight in tiny shining armor. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Year Canada is the Vimy Memorial in Saskatoon. Thanks so much for watching and hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.